Growing up, one of my fondest memories was going to the store to pick up a new video game. We didn't go that often, so when we did, it was an occasion I savored every moment of. We would drive to Walmart or Best Buy, and I would pick out a game for my PlayStation 3 or my PSP. We would do the rest of our shopping and eventually get back into the car where I would open the plastic wrap and look for a manual. If there was one, I would read and reread it until I got home. Then, and only then, would I play the game. I grew up on the edge of when manuals were slowly becoming not a thing anymore, so you never knew if the game would include one. It was almost like my own form of gambling in that way. If the game had one, it immediately added to the experience for me because I felt like I was part of the game's world before I even started playing it. All my favorite games on PS2 had a manual, so if a PS3 game did, I assumed it would be good by that merit alone. And if it didn't have one, well, then I would read whatever paper was in the case, even if it was just an ad for another game that I would never probably play. Either way, those manuals and inserts meant a lot to me, and recently I've been thinking about how games don't really do that anymore. So let's talk about why that is and what we've really lost when we stopped printing manuals. It's hard to say exactly when manuals stopped being included outright because it was more of a gradual thing. I personally noticed their death on the PlayStation 3, but I'm sure this varied from console to console and by publisher. Whatever the case, it generally felt like they were well and truly dead by the 8th generation of consoles, with the PS4, Xbox One, and Switch putting the nail in the coffin. Sure, there have been exceptions, but for the most part, manuals have been relegated to extra territory included with special editions and the like, instead of being considered essential. So why did publishers and game developers stop including them in the first place? There are multiple explanations for why games stopped including manuals, and I'm sure at the end of the day, like things usually are, the real reason is a combination of all the reasons I'm about to list. There are probably other explanations I haven't considered, but these are the things that most obviously come to mind for me when I thought about this absence of manuals that I've noticed in the last 5 years. First and foremost is the price to print. There's no exact right answer to this that I could find, but it seems like it could cost anywhere from a couple cents to a couple dollars to print a game manual, depending on things like company relationships and quantity of manuals printed. For simplicity's sake, let's say $1 per manual. Well, you might be saying that's not too bad, but that's only for one game. Unless it's uniquely bad or bespoke, you're going to print and sell more than one game. So we're actually looking more towards a cost somewhere between tens of thousands and a few $1,000,000 for most game manuals, just to add on that alone. Okay, so that's a little bit more expensive compared to the overall cost of game development, but things get even worse when you consider the fact that not every game and thus not every manual is going to be sold at full price or even at all. Things are going to sit on shelves for years, and publishers might overestimate how well the game is going to sell, leading to an even tighter profit margin in the end. There are other aspects to consider as well when it comes to cost. It might only be $1 to print those manuals, but there's also the cost to have someone create the overall graphics for the manuals. This process could take literally a day to possibly months, depending on the manual and the studio making the manual, because let's face it, not all video games had great manuals, no matter how much I miss them personally. But regardless of the time it took, that is time where someone has to be paid to make a manual instead of something else, be it in-game assets and text or promotional material. So this expense going to the manuals, no matter how small it is going there instead of somewhere else, adding again to that overall budget. Beyond the simple cost answer, there's also a few other reasons that I can think of for getting rid of a manual, coming from the dev and publisher perspective, trying to look at it from that angle. Firstly is the fact that not everyone is going to be reading these things. I loved manuals growing up. It felt so cool to have a piece of the game in my hands, but that doesn't matter to a lot of people. And that's by no means a dig on those people that only care about the game. I get that for a lot of people, the most important part, probably the complete part of a game, is playing it. The case, the box art, the manual, and even the disc and console it runs on are all secondary to actually playing it. That makes a lot of sense. You're buying a game to play it after all, to have that experience. Everything else is additional, even if collectors like myself would say otherwise. We are in the minority when it comes to caring about this sort of thing, and I'm sure game publishers realized this fact a few years ago before they got rid of manuals. So why would they include it that if no one is going to read it in the first place? Soon the boxes only include the disc and some cards with an ad or some legal information. Eventually those got removed, and now the only real remnant is the piece of plastic that's used to hold that paper in place. The last reason I can think of for manuals to be replaced is the fact that as more and more games were sold digitally in addition to physical releases, it just made sense to a lot of people for the manual and any additional documentation to be included within the game in some way. How that was done varies from game to game, but it seems to generally be the final evolution of the video game manual. It no longer exists, and if it does, it has no physical form anymore. When manuals were finally well and completely no longer included in physical games, it left a hole that needed to be filled somewhere. That often meant including everything you needed to know about how to play a game in a tutorial right in the beginning or over the course of the first hour or so. This usually works. For the most part, a tutorial isn't the most intrusive thing, and a lot of games were including one before the practice of printing manuals stopped being a thing. So it can work for sure, but that doesn't mean it's always going to work best, in my opinion. Sometimes it would be nice to start a new game without having to spend the first 10 minutes to an hour having the game explain how it's meant to be played. This isn't really an issue if you're playing it for the first time, but if it's a frequent favorite, then this can become very old very quickly as you're just trying to get into a game that you already know very well. And while some games let you skip this tutorial portion, not all of them do. This can also affect the pacing of the game's story as well. How many games are there that start you right off in the middle of the action only for it to stop you with a text box or a character explaining how you're meant to do things? Well, it's come to be accepted and most people ignore this break in the action, and it doesn't have to be like this. If you had a manual you could read ahead of time, the developers could choose to just throw you into the action and assume you know what you're doing. And I guess that sort of brings me to the other way physical manuals were replaced if it wasn't in a tutorial. If a game didn't include a manual or an in-game tutorial, then the next best thing was a digital manual. You would think, given my love for physical manuals, I would like at least the option of a digital manual, but more often than not, it seems to be a pale imitation of the real thing. I think the biggest issue is that there seems to be like this is an afterthought that is usually hard to find, being hidden somewhere in the settings, additional files, or often completely separate from the game. I think with PS3 they had it like that. And if you can't readily find it, the same amount of care isn't going to be put into it. And if it doesn't physically exist, it might as well not even be included at all at this point. Not really much more to say on it if I'm being honest. It's just, I think, the worst version. Do a tutorial at that point. So official physical manuals don't really exist anymore, but what's the big deal overall? Well, digital manuals might be a bad replacement in my eyes. At least they exist as an option, and most games provide a tutorial to get you started in the game, so these must be worthy alternatives even if they aren't my favorite alternatives. I've explained why I don't like these alternatives, but manuals weren't perfect either. They often showed you how to play the game, but some could be confusing, some could be lazy afterthoughts, and since these were physical, they could be lost, thrown out, or missing, destroyed. I mean, they're manuals, they're paper, anything could happen to them. All these options have their drawbacks. I'm not going to lie and say physical manuals don't have any drawbacks. But one thing that gives them an edge, in my opinion, is the fact that they were often more than just instructions. Not every manual is perfect, but the great ones were a work of art, combining essential information, flavor text, and art book into one. A good manual expanded on the game in a way that felt intentional instead of tacked on or an afterthought. I still remember poring over the manuals for the Sly Cooper games, one of my childhood favorite series I bring up sometimes. They were written as if they were in an in-game book that was the core of the story. Sure, it explained the basics of the game, but it also gave info on the characters and had artwork that helped make the world feel real to me as a kid. And as the games went on, the manuals kept the same concept but got more worn with each iteration, adding to the world building and the use of this book that you were looking at every single game. It didn't need to do all those things. It could have just been a list of controls and character actions. But the fact that it was so much more was the first step in making me a lifelong fan of that series. Now as an adult, I'm still collecting any part of that world I can get my hands on, and the manuals were a big reason for why that happened. I was in the game from the moment I opened the case, and I don't even know if I would still be such a huge fan if it wasn't for those manuals. They were such a huge part of my first experience with that series. And I know I'm not the only one who has had this experience with game manuals, because there are people out there selling manuals right now to people like me. For better or for worse, these pieces of paper add something to the overall experience. And this manual market that sprung up isn't relegated to just old games that might be missing their original manual either. No, there are whole online shops dedicated to making fan-made manuals for new games that were never released with one of their own. No matter how small of a group it might be, there are people that still wish these little booklets existed, and fans have decided to step into the hole left behind by the devs and the publishers. And while I would still prefer if games still came with manuals that are official, it's cool to see people's personal interpretation of something that never was for new titles. That is at least a silver lining in the loss of official physical manuals. So overall, I guess after all this yapping, I think it's easy to say that manuals aren't printed anymore because it's an added cost that's been cut out for more economic reasons. We don't really need them anymore because of the basic mechanics of a game can be introduced in the tutorial or gradually learned as you played. In an ever more digital world, there's not really a need to print out hundreds of thousands or even millions of slips of paper that are only going to tell you how to do the very basics of a game. Even if there's an in-game tutorial, the game can always include a virtual manual, and that does the same thing at the end of the day. So even if only a little bit, games become cheaper to make. Unfortunately, that often has the effect of making the game feel cheaper as well. And I think this is just one more thing that we're losing when we lose manuals. Slowly stripping away the fun from these games and making them just a product to be consumed. As I've laid out, manuals are more than a list of how to play a game. They often included more than the mechanics and did a small part of making the game exist in the real world. I'm sure a big part of this is personal nostalgia for what games used to be, and if you are younger or never cared in the first place, you might not see what the big deal is. Who cares as long as the game is still included? But for me, these manuals were part of the game, so it's just kind of a bummer that for the most part they're gone now. It's one less thing that we ultimately get for games that are about the same price or more than they used to be when I was growing up. But at least some people are making fan manuals. That's a cool silver lining. That's a good thing at the end of the day. But yeah, I just think it sucks that these things were lost. It's something that meant a lot to me, and I've just been thinking about it a lot recently. But what do you guys think? Do you care about manuals, or does that not really matter to you at all? Did you grow up when those were already long gone? Or did you read them on the way home from the store like I did? I'd love to hear what you guys have to say down in the comments. And if you enjoy this video, my weird rambling about this topic, I would really appreciate it if you considered liking and subscribing for more. I stream pretty often. I also make videos like this. Regardless, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.